Hey Brave Church, Pastor Samuel here. Hey, it is my honor to introduce to you today our guest speaker. His name is Larry Osborne. And I was thinking about it. Over the years, there have been people that I've had the privilege of introducing that have been really easy to introduce. Some have been kind of hard to introduce, and it usually mostly has to do not just with who they are and what they've accomplished, but what they've meant in your life. And so it's really a great privilege for me to introduce Larry because Larry has been a super impactful person in my life. At first, he impacted me through his writings. He's written some amazing books. Just Google him. But then also just watching his leadership from afar, and he's led an incredible church, like 7 or more locations now in San Diego County and the North Coast Church, an amazing church, a healthy church, and we really aspire to be the kind of healthy church that they are. And so, but then also, then through different circumstances and friends, God connected us, and he's become a personal mentor that's really been speaking into my life these last few years in particular, and just really can't understate enough the impact he's had on me, but also through that, the impact it's had on our church. And so we are really blessed to have him. We want to honor him, welcome him. Guys, you're in for a treat. Let's welcome Larry Osborne.
They never saw it coming. They figured they were God's chosen, that they weren't doing everything the way they should be doing it, but they were at least better than these people over here. But that's not the way God saw it. You see, God had given them a land, a promised land, and he'd said when they went in through Moses that if you will follow my commands, I'm going to bless you in incredible ways. So much so that other nations are going to literally be jealous of you and come to you to learn from you. But if you decide to ignore my commands, you might be my chosen people. But if you decide to worship their gods, if you decide to take upon yourself their ways, then I'm going to let you have the God, the kings, and the ways that you choose. And it finally happened. And a wicked, damnable, evil, many would say, I know the angels would say, as we'll explain in a minute, the most wicked nation that has ever existed, a demon-worshiping king who mocked the God Most High, comes and besieges their holy city, Jerusalem. And he gets a victory. And he takes with him the beautiful young ladies for his harem. He takes a group of young, bright nobles, chains them up, and takes them all the way back to Babylon. One of those guys that was taken was a young man, 16 years old probably, Daniel. And at the end of his life, Daniel looks back and he writes a book, an autobiography, if you will, about his life, picking up a few highlights, and about his God and what his God had done. And it was such an amazing book that God said, print it and save it. It's one of the 66 books in our Bible. It's called the Book of Daniel. And what we're going to do today is we're going to take a look at what he describes as his life and his values to understand something. And that is how he was able to not just survive, but to thrive in the most godless of environments ever. I think as he was dragged off, we would have looked at him and thought, well, this is one guy whose life is going to end up nothing. You had all this opportunity, you're part of the noble class and all of that. On your way, you are castrated. When you get there, you're going to have your name changed. You're going to be forced to study wicked, demonic things. And then you're going to be put in the service of this evil king. Man, what could have been. But God had a plan. And what could have been was nothing compared to what actually was. And 70 years later, he looks back and he writes this book that we call the Book of Daniel. Now, if you had the privilege of growing up in a Christian home and had this thing we call Sunday school, you probably think you know a little bit about Daniel. I sure did, because it was kind of the ultimate Sunday school adventure story. whether it was with videos or old school flanographs, whatever. They always found a way to get Daniel and the lions and his 3 buddies thrown into a fiery furnace and all kinds of different things. They found a way to get it there. And in fact, they got it in so many of the curriculums year after year that I think I could have taught it by 5th grade. I just figured, I know this thing. But in reality, I missed everything about it. Because it was never meant to be a Sunday school curriculum. They didn't have Sunday school then. It was never meant to be an adventure story. He's writing it at the end of his life as an adult primer for those who would try to serve God in an increasingly dark and godless environment. Do any of you think that might be a little bit where we're living today? And so what I want to do today, we're going to just look at Daniel chapter 1, and I want us to put on a lens that asks this question: what is it telling us about not just surviving, but thriving in a godless environment? And we're going to discover it says some incredibly helpful things that also are very counterintuitive to the way we would naturally respond in our flesh. And sadly, as I look at the church, I have the privilege of being one of the teachers at North Coast Church, and many of the Christians I have the privilege of working with around the country, is very contrary to what Daniel says to do. And it might be part of the reason why we feel like we're surviving less and less, or we're hanging on by a thread. And we will discover as we walk through just the first chapter of Daniel, the 4 secrets to his success that allowed him not to survive, but to actually thrive. You see, when I grew up, I thought the ultimate purpose of Daniel was to teach this lesson. Maybe some of you identify with me on this. That if I trust God and do the right thing, I will be delivered from everything. Right? Trust God, be courageous, do the right thing, and hungry lions, when you're cast to them, are going to go on a high-carb diet. Trust God and do the right things, and when you've refused to bow down before an idol, you'll be cast into a fiery furnace, and you'll come out alive. Oh, man, just be courageous and obedient. But if that's the message of Daniel, would you agree with me? God has some explaining to do? Because every other person thrown to hungry lions was eaten. And everybody burned at the stake and thrown in a furnace was barbecued. They're done. So what is the lesson? The lesson's the one I've mentioned already. I just want to drive it home again. Daniel is a primer for adults on how we serve God in such a way that we thrive, that we make a difference. You know, by the time he died, when he wrote this, there had been 3 revivals in wicked, evil Babylon. Let me tell you one more thing before we read it. I mentioned it was the most wicked. Here's how I know. In the book of Revelation, when the angels discovered that Jesus is finally going to return, they cry out, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon." Not Nazi Germany, not Sodom and Gomorrah. Babylon, by the way, doesn't exist. Prophecy was said it would be destroyed, never be rebuilt. That's exactly what happened. So why, thousands of years later, are they going to cry out, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon"? Because it's the epitome, it's the word picture, it's the metaphor they have for evil at its absolute worst. That's the situation Daniel finds himself in as we pick up the story. So if you got a paper Bible with you, open it up to Daniel. If you're brand new at following Jesus and brand new with the Bible, God put a table of contents there on the front to make it real easy to find. Or grab a digital device, because I'm going to highlight some things I want to encourage you to underline and to mark up, because I hope you treat your Bible not as a holy book. Like I grew up, it was a holy book we took to church. The rest of the week it kept the coffee table from floating away. And you would go to hell immediately if you put a coffee mug on top of it or you wrote in it. And I had no idea that it was actually supposed to be a textbook on how to live and who my God is and who we are and what happens when we respond in certain ways. And that's how Daniel wrote this. So we're going to walk through and we're going to see some of the key things that set him apart. The first starts in Daniel chapter 1, just the first 2 verses. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, who was king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, this demon-worshipping king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem, and he besieged it. And verse 2 is not what we would expect in our Bible. But the Lord protected Jerusalem and destroyed and sent. Nope. Verse 2 says, underline this, highlight it. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. And these he carried off the temple of his God in Babylon and put in the treasure house of his God. Like what? The most wicked guy ever, demon-worshiping, evil nation. He comes to besiege Jerusalem, and the Lord didn't just step aside. The Lord said, come and take it. Catch that. The Lord delivered. And then he went into the temple of God and took things that were devoted to God Most High, and he brought them back to the temple of Baal, his demon god, and he put up a display case to mock the God of Israel and the true God. God says, go for it. But here's the thing I want you to catch. When Daniel's writing his life story, he says, before you know anything else, you need to know my perspective. Because everything I thought, everything I said, and everything I did was built upon the foundation of these 2 verses, which I, frankly, for many years had never seen. Even as a young pastor, I taught through Daniel numerous times. I just raced through these first 2 verses because I want to get to the exciting stuff. And it was like building a house without digging the foundation. This is the key to understanding everything we're going to see in the rest of our time today, and everything you'll see as you read through Daniel, which, by the way, I want to give you an assignment. Is that okay? A little bit of homework? What I want to encourage you to do this week is read through the book of Daniel, putting on the lens of the 4 keys to his success and the mark he made for God, and see how it shows up over and over and over again in his life. So what is the first secret we see here? Optimism. Hope. You see, Daniel's looking around and he's taken off as a captive. And as I said, he's going to be castrated so he never has a family, because that's what they do to young nobles from other nations who are going to enter the king's service. Remember, they're bringing along beautiful women in a harem. They want to solve that problem. And all of this is happening to him. But in the midst of it, he knows this key secret that drives our optimism. That even in Babylon, God is in control of who's in control. There's never a point where God's up there going, oh man, I didn't think of that option. Hey, Gabriel, come here, help me out with this one. No, God's in control of who is in control. And sometimes he'll use the short-term success of the wicked to carry out his will. Panic and despair are never from God. And if we don't get this first point down, which is a major one, I'll spend most of my time on it, then build the next 3. If we don't get this major point down as a foundation, everything is eventually going to go off the rails, because here's how life is experienced. I know you've done that, and I do it. That I am more than willing to do things God's way as long as they work quickly. Amen? And then if they're not working for a few weeks or months or a couple of years, after that I realize he's too busy elsewhere. I need to take this into my own hands. And I have watched for the last couple of decades, especially the church in America, I have watched as some cultural things and stuff have gone ways that would not line up with Scripture. I've watched a growing sense of despair and a forgetting that God's in control. And because of that, what happens is we stop fighting the battle God's way and we start fighting in the flesh. We return evil for evil instead of good for evil. Instead of loving our enemies, we begin to hate our enemies. And I mean, I could go right on. You know where I'm going with this. And it all makes sense, because if you try doing something one way and it doesn't work, you try another way. I mean, the old saying, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And so we take it into our own hands. But what Daniel realized during his 70 years, by the way, during all of those 70 years, Babylon continued to reign. And when he died, Babylon was still reigning. He understood that God was in control. And he always responded God's way. He knew that God had made a promise. that he would take them away to another nation, but he would return them. So no matter what the score was, he knew that. And so here's my question. Are you and I living like we know God's in control? With the people that work with us in our neighborhood, a small group we meet in, our friends, our sons and daughters, our parents, would they think that we are actually optimistic and hopeful that God's still in control? Or as they would listen into our conversations, would they start to wonder? You know, like every pastor, I get asked all the time if we would do a series on the book of Revelation. Now, everybody wants us to do a series on the book of Revelation, not because they want to study the book of Revelation. They want to know who the Antichrist is and when Jesus is returning. And sadly, I'm on the welcoming committee, not the programming committee, so I don't have all the details. But I have read the book. Have you? I peeked at the end. I don't get all the details, but I peeked. Did you know we win? Did you know we win? So if we win, who cares what the score is in the third quarter? So my question to you, as you're trying to figure out how to respond to things, and things we're going to see in a few moments, do you really believe we win? That's what hope and optimism and faith is really all about. It's that confidence. Now, I know I'm in the Bay Area. I get that. So you're going to have to give me a little bit of grace for this story, and it's all my dad's fault. But I grew up a USC football fan. Can I get some grace? Come on, Dublin, you give it to me at least. I ain't doing it. And a number of years ago, USC used to actually be good. A strange thing. Some of you younger ones wouldn't know that. But they were on their way to their third straight, it looked like, national championship. Now, if you know anything about USC football, you would realize that the rivalry is with UCLA to some degree, but the real rivalry is with a school called Notre Dame. Two-story programs, cross-sectional, lots of national championships, Heisman trophies, all of this. That's the game you want to win. Well, this particular year, USC was playing Notre Dame, middle of the season, and Notre Dame was a decent team, but nowhere near as good as USC. But if you know anything about sports, what happens is, if you don't take advantage of opportunities against a weaker opponent, something bad is going to happen. And the whole game was like that. USC was a very fast team, so to slow them down, the groundskeepers had grown the grass this high. If you look at an old film, you literally can't see the running back's shoes. So it kind of evened out the thing a little bit. And sure enough, at the very end, and I just knew it. I was watching the game alone. I just knew it was going to happen. They hadn't taken advantage of opportunities. And Notre Dame goes down with about 2 minutes left and scores a go-ahead touchdown. Everybody's going nuts with it. I'm like pretty darn frustrated. But I know God's in control of who's in control. So SC will have a miracle finish. Well, instead of a miracle finish, the kick goes out of the end zone. They get the ball on the 20-yard line. They run a short little play. And then on the next play, Matt Leinart, the quarterback, fades back. And a Notre Dame lineman breaks through and throws him for a 13-yard loss. It's now, third and 87 yards, second sticking off. The players are chest bumping one another. They show the fans, and they're all high-fiving the stupid leprechauns going across the field. And I'm supposed to preach 2 Saturday night services that night. And I've lost my sanctification big time. I'm muttering all those Christian euphemisms. I'm about ready to throw something at the television, except for I realize this brand new big screen, hold back. And as the announcers are talking about the end of the winning streak and all of this, as I'm in the dumps as a fan, just, whatever, what happens is on fourth down, a gazillion yards to go, the quarterback throws a pass. It just gets over the fingertips of a defensive back, nestles in the receiver's hands, who runs all the way down to the 1-yard line, and on the last play of the game, order is restored in the universe. Now, I have a digital version of that game. I watch it every couple of days. No. I've watched it occasionally, but here's the weird thing. Hang with me on this. Every time I watch it and I come to that point where the quarterback is thrown for a 13-yard loss, it's fourth and a gazillion yards, It's all hopeless. And I'm watching the chest bumps, the high fives, and the leprechauns. You know what I do? I play it again. And I play it a second time, and a third. And I play it in slow motion. And I enjoy every moment of the chest bumps and the high fives and the cute little leprechaun. Why? What's the difference? I'm watching the same thing on the same TV. There's only one thing that's different. It's that I know how it ends. And that changes everything. And my encouragement to you, if you want to not just survive, you want to thrive in the marketplace, you want to thrive in the spiritual realm, you want to thrive in any area of life, take Daniel's lesson and start every day with the understanding that I don't understand it and some things about it I don't like, but God's in control. And when it's all said and done, we win. Remember that, everything comes easy. And that's what we're going to see. I said I'd spend most of my time on that first part because we're now going to see the things that flowed out of his understanding, that it was the Lord who had caused all of this to happen. And that allowed him, because of that, to respond so different than any of us would naturally, and many of us are today in the world and the workplace we work in. So the second thing we're going to find is wisdom. Daniel not only has optimism, he has wisdom. And if you're a note taker, write this down. It's wisdom to pick his battles properly. That's the kind of wisdom we're going to see. And we're going to see it in verses 3 through 7. He knew what to fight about and what to just go, oh well. Then the king ordered Asenaz, verse 3, chief of the court officials, to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family and nobility. And I love the humble way that Daniel describes himself and his friend. Young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's service, if I say so myself. And when he got there, he was to teach them the language and the literature of the Babylonians. You know what that is? That's astrology and the occult. Astrology and the occult. For 3 years he's supposed to study it. And the king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table, and they were to be trained for 3 years. And after that, they were to enter the king's service. The best of the best study the literature of the Chaldeans and language to learn astrology and the occult so they could join damnable Nebuchadnezzar, the demon-worshiping guy, mocking God, so they could join his administration with the idea of making him more successful. Among those who were chosen were some from Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And the chief official gave them new names. To Daniel, whose name means God is my judge, here is his new name, Belshazzar, which means Baal, the demon god's prince. That's like your name is Christian and you're a Jesus follower and they change your name to Satan. Now, if you're forced to study evil, damnable stuff, if you have your name changed to honor a demon god or Satan, and then you're expected to go and serve these evil people, I want to say most of us would draw a line and there'd be a battle already. Would you agree with me? I mean, the moment I got into the king's service, when he said go get coffee, I'd get it and bring it back, right? But we're going to see Daniel didn't spit in the coffee. We're going to see later on, he kept serving so well, he kept getting promoted. How bizarre is that? And what he had was this incredible wisdom to know this. There's a big difference between what we don't like and what God forbids. And one of the things that I see the people in my church, and I know in my own flesh, my first temptation is, I tend to draw lines around things that are symbolic, not things that have Bible verses behind them. Does the Bible anywhere say you have to have a God-honoring name? No. Daniel goes, call me whatever you want, just not late to dinner. Does the Bible say anywhere you can't study astrology and the occult? No, it says you don't do them. And because Daniel graduates number 1 in his class, instead of sitting way in the back and, throwing spitwads or whatever, he sits in the first row, takes copious notes, graduates at the top of the class. When he enters the king's service, as he keeps rising up, there's a day where he can stand before the king and said, King, I know all this stuff better than anybody, and let me tell you, it's pure baloney. Let me tell you about the God Most High. Could have never happened if he didn't understand the difference between what God forbids and what we don't like. And because of that, he was able to have this third trait, which is courage. Courage. Now, when I tell you, courage without wisdom is bravado. Courage without wisdom just picks a fight, and it never makes a difference. Because he knew God is in control of who's in control. Well, I don't like any of this, whatever, but there's no Bible verse, I'll go along. But then there were places where, oh, there's a Bible verse here. And at those points, drew the line in the sand. His three buddies had been asked to bow down before an idol that was made to Nebuchadnezzar. And they said, no, we're not going to do it. So he made the furnace all the hotter. And they said, we're not going to do it. And then I love this phrase, as he's about to throw them in, they say, listen, our God is able to deliver us. Now in Sunday school, they made that the end of the lesson, be confident. But the Bible actually says this, our God is able to deliver us. And even if he does not, we're not going to bow down. I think they were more shocked than anybody else when they were still alive in the furnace. They probably thought, oh my gosh, we're on the wrong side. You know, it's like, what? It made no sense to them. Never happened before, never happened afterward. Now, it was a really dark time in Israel. Otherwise, God would not have just turned the nation over and said, this is the ultimate timeout I've been warning you about. And Gutenberg hadn't come along, so Daniel wasn't able to read his Bible. He didn't know the 613 laws of the Old Testament, 10 of which we call the 10 Commandments, because he would only know what the priests were teaching. And at a dark time like that, no matter how much you were godly at your heart, you didn't have the information to be godly in your life. But even at the darkest moment, the Israelites knew three things. Never bow down to an idol. Little boys are circumcised on the 8th day. And the kosher diet. Which explains the next part of this story. Verse 8. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine. And by the way, catch this for later, very important. So he demanded the chief official, he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself this way. Now God had caused the official to show favor and compassion to Daniel because he wasn't a religious jerk. But the official told Daniel, I'm afraid of the Lord my king. You don't know how bloodthirsty this place is. I'm afraid of the Lord my king who has assigned your food and drink. Why should he see you looking worse than other young men your age? The king would have my head because of you. So then Daniel threw a conniption fit. Oh, I'm sorry, wrong Bible again. Then Daniel said to the guard whom the chief official appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please test your servants for just 10 days. Please, and the most reasonable request ever. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink, and then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the royal food, and then we'll accept whatever the consequences are. We won't whine, we won't complain. Whatever happens, it's up to God. Treat your servants in accordance with what you see. Well, he agreed to this and tested them for 10 days. And at the end of those 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. Now, some of you are thinking, well, I'll go all vegetables. I'll look healthier and better nourished. You need to understand the Hebrew actually says, just a little freebie, sidebar. The Hebrew actually says they were fatter. Because think back to ancient history. Who were the skinny people? The poor and the unfortunate. You ever seen some of those old paintings where, being chunked out a little bit was the epitome of beauty? And so what actually happened is Daniel didn't get a 6-pack, he gained 6 pounds. Which is why this is one of my favorite verses in the whole Bible, but we'll go somewhere else. Okay. Just a fun little sidebar on that one. So they looked better, and then notice verse 17. To these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and understanding, all kinds of literature and learning, astrology, and occult. God blessed them this so they could graduate number 1. And Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. You see, we need a lot more submission than we have because God's in control of who's in control, but we always need to understand biblical submission is never blind. That when God has spoken, then I got to draw the line. But our mistake has been we've drawn the line when God hasn't spoken and when God has spoken. And by the time we're doing the battle over what God has spoken, we've lost our right to be heard. And sometimes we've become so angry, it's not a please, it's a demand. Do you see how just radically bizarre Daniel's response has been through all of this compared to what we would naturally do? And then the fourth and last one is respect. Daniel, in every single relationship you're going to see, not only here, please, will you test, God had given them favor, but in every relationship, he's filled with respect. He actually loves God's enemies. How bizarre is that? There is an incident later on you'll read when you read through Daniel, if you do this week, where Nebuchadnezzar's ego gets so big, he stands on the wall looking around the palace and all of this. He says, this is the great Babylon I have built by my strength, my wisdom, my glory. And God says, done, mic drop. You're going to have a mental breakdown and live like a wild animal for 12 months. Do you know who gets to deliver that message? Daniel. Because he's risen so high. Now, I don't know about you, but here's in my flesh how I would deliver that message. Hey, Neb, baby, I've been praying for this for a long time. And I am really happy that I get to deliver this message to you. When you read Daniel, you know what he's going to say? Oh, King, I wish it was anybody but you. Think about that. That's mind-boggling. I've given you this phrase, but I'll give it to you again to just jot it down. Daniel served a demon-worshiping king so well he kept getting promoted. We live in a day and age, if somebody served in the wrong administration on whatever end of a political spectrum you'd be on, you'd be calling that person a sellout. And we isolate and isolate and isolate instead of infiltrate and infiltrate and infiltrate. And then we wonder why we don't thrive and why God's not making beachheads in places that seem dark. No one listens to people who don't like or respect them. Right? I don't know about you, but if I know you don't like me, if I know you don't respect me, and then you come and tell me something, I go, oh, thank you. I so appreciate it. No, all my defenses are up like crazy. And if we want to change and influence, we have to take the path of Jesus. The only people he wasn't respectful for when you read the New Testament are the arrogant religious leaders who knew the Bible better than anybody else and who were more self-disciplined than anybody else, but had this fatal flaw of looking down on everybody else. And tried to keep people out until they were good enough to get in. Other than that, it's amazing to me the respect that Jesus shows over and over and over again. And it's the key to thriving and having that kind of influence. Daniel 1:18-21 reads this way. At the end of the time set by the king to bring them into his service, the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar, and the king talked with them, and he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's administration or service. And in every manner of wisdom about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters, previous valedictorians, in his whole kingdom. And Daniel remained there until the first year of King Cyrus, about 70 years. Men and women, we are not here by accident. You are not in the neighborhood, you're not in the apartment, you're not in the house, you're not in the cubicle, you're not leading the business, owning the business. Whatever it is that you're doing, there's nothing about where you are today that is by accident. And God has prepared you to make a difference for him, wherever it is you are. But the only way we can make a difference for him is by playing by his rules, not ours. Trusting him with all of our heart, not leaning on our own understanding. Oh, that hasn't been working. No, do what doesn't work. if he says that's how to do it. Because lo and behold, the miracle finish shows up every time. Now, I got to be honest, it didn't show up for Daniel. Daniel never got back to Jerusalem. Never happened. But I'm pretty sure if you asked him today how things are going, he'd say, they're going swell. You see, our perspective is too short. And we forget where we're headed and the fact we win. And I think sometimes we think that, well, our little place, it doesn't make any difference. And I am here to tell you that if you had been around when Daniel was captured and was taken and all of Babylon was and that was going to happen to him, you would have thought, here was a guy who had such great potential for good in the kingdom. And now, look at his circumstances now. There's nothing that's going to happen out of his life. He would be considered the least likely to thrive, rise up, and lead 3 revivals in damnable Babylon. But he did. And I want to close with a story that taught me the importance of each and every one of us, no matter how insignificant we think our obedience is. It goes back to a family vacation. We were going to Carlsbad Caverns, if you've ever been there. And a major part of this story you need to know is my wife is claustrophobic. Now, Nancy is not crazy claustrophobic, but to be honest, you can see crazy from where she is. So when we went there, we knew she was going to stay up in the visitor center the whole time on the top while I went down with my 3 kids to have the experience. But it's a huge visitor center. You've ever been there. They got a very big elevator. And the cave, they saw pictures of it when you go down, the main cave is huge. So she goes, I'll go down with you. I thought, oh, that's cool. We go down. And then you could just see her relax in the huge cave we're in. So she says, I think I'll go on the tour with you guys. And I'm like, hallelujah, family memory. This is cool. I didn't expect her to be able to go. As we're standing in line, we're waiting there. And 3 guys come out. And one says to the other 2, that was so cool when they turned the lights out. I'm like, do I tell her or not? So I didn't. But she heard. And she goes to me, they turned the lights out? I go, honey, it's only for a second or 2. Don't worry. Are you sure? Are you sure? Trust me, I'm a pastor. So we go on the tour, and everything is great. And then at the very end, if you've ever been there, they set you on a log, and then they unplug it just so you can see what pitch dark is. You go in front of it like that, you can't see nothing. 1001, 1002, 1013. And then a bat bit me. Like, I felt the bat and a little blood. And then the bat spoke. It said, I will never trust you again. And I'm thinking, in my profession, this is a really bad day. And then I remembered, my oldest son had the first generation of those Timex Indiglo watches. You know, you push the button where they first had the little LED light? Now, that light was so weeny that when we brought it home to Oceanside at night, he's trying to see what time it is, and he calls me, Dad, it doesn't work. So we had to get a flashlight so we could see what time it is. But I'm desperate. So I say, Nathan, push the button on your watch. And he does. And suddenly you could see the ground and feet. The bat let go. My marriage was saved. Some guy over here goes, turn that off. I said, I'll kill you if you do. But here's a lesson I learned. That weeny little light that couldn't make a difference and tell us the time in a bedroom in Oceanside at night could have led us out of that cave. Men and women, the darker it gets, the brighter your light will shine. You don't have to become some super halogen. You just got to push the buttons of obedience that God has called you to. And see what God will do. God put Daniel in our Bible not so we'd have Sunday school stories, so we would know what to do when we find ourselves in our own Babylon. It's not hopeless. It's exciting. Father, would you take the things that we've looked at? Would you speak to our hearts so we would know the response that you are calling us to? to walk in obedience for your glory, your fame, which is always for our benefit as well. In the name of Jesus, amen.
Thanks so much for joining us today and listening to today's teaching. We really hope this message has impacted your life. Now, if you'd like more information about who we are, you can visit us at brave.church. There, you're going to find more information about our on-campus gatherings, our upcoming events, and ways to give and partner with what God is doing through our church. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the like button on this message. Thanks again for joining us, and we hope to see you next time.